Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Catherine Grill, the CEO and co-founder of Neolth. We are back today for another Ask the Experts live stream event. Based on the results of the community poll, what you voted for was how do you handle breakups and the stress related to breakup, which is pretty timely, I think, coming off of the end of February and Valentine's Day. So I have with me here today Dr. Claire Wheeler, our Chief Medical Officer. Dr. Wheeler is both a medical doctor and a PhD clinical psychologist and has a lot of expertise in how to handle tricky things in life, like breakups. So, Dr. Wheeler, thanks so much for being here today. I appreciate it. I was wondering if, in a second, if you can come off mute and just share with us, you know, what is a breakup? What does that mean for us? I think both emotionally, how is it similar to grieving? And then also physically, because people talk about heartache and physical pain with breakups, but I think there is actually a lot of physical stuff going on in the body when you're in that grieving process. So thanks, Dr. Wheeler, for being here today. And yeah, if you could share a little bit with us, we'd love to hear.
Hello, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for that introduction. And yes, indeed, I guess I do have some experience in this field, both personally and definitely professionally. And the thing to know about falling in love and then breaking up is that it's an entire mind, body, spirit uh, experience. And there actually are physical markers when you're falling in love. Mostly those are seen in the brain. When you start developing this really powerful attachment to another person, especially when it is a romantic and or sexual attraction or attachment that you have, your whole body's involved. And in the brain, what often tends to happen is it's like a weird sort of addiction. And I say that, and I mean that word very carefully, because addiction is marked by dopamine release in the brain, and that's a neurotransmitter that's released in your brain when sort of as a reward. So when you do something you enjoy doing, a lot of times you enjoy doing it because you get dopamine, and that can lead to problems if you stop doing that. So what happens in the brain when you're falling in love is you start getting dopamine surges when you think about the person and you see the person, etc. And ironically enough, over time, as a relationship develops, what you want to see is a shift in brain chemistry towards things like oxytocin and serotonin, which are neurotransmitters that make you feel more comfortable with someone. They induce bonding on a deeper level. And so a lot of relationships don't make that transition. The in love crazy phase is very intoxicating and exciting, but then when you get in for the longer haul, that's often an off ramp from a relationship where the person's just not prepared to go into that next level of connection. And when that is lost, what happens is a withdrawal type of phenomenon in the brain. And so I often recommend to people when they're going through a breakup is to, first of all, just understand that your brain is responding to this as if something that you were really, really almost addicted to has been taken away. So there will be cravings, there will be the temptation to do things to try to get back what one lost. And this is a marker, again, then of grief. So losing a very close relationship, even if it's not just a friendship, but a friendship, a platonic connection, can also cause these changes that look a lot like grief and bereavement in people who've lost someone to death.
Oh my gosh, so much good information. I love jumping into the brain science here, talking about dopamine, oxytocin, all these hormones and chemicals that are floating around in our brains. It really kind of puts it into perspective as to what we're going through and just how much it does impact our body and our emotions. I really liked what you said too about, thinking about how the relationship changes over time. We have this first period, which is maybe a couple weeks or a couple months, where everything is so exciting and fresh and new. And especially if you're younger, your relationships might not get past that phase. So when you break up, it can be really like an abrupt, almost withdrawal, like addiction. But really interesting to think about, how the brain chemicals change over time, because that overlays with that natural shift of when you start to get more comfortable in a relationship. And I remember being younger and thinking, when I reached that point, like something was wrong, like we're not having all this excitement anymore. And then now being older, just realizing, well, that's a natural part of the relationship progressing and having those different hormones, maybe less dopamine, but more oxytocin, and really being dependent and relying on this other person. Um, I was thinking about breakups and personal experience and also professional experience, and what are some of the healthy ways and maybe some of the unhealthy ways to cope with the breakup and this really kind of feelings of grief. And one of the things that I can remember is just really feeling like you have multiple feelings at once. Like you can have, anger and sadness, or maybe a sense of relief and happiness. And sometimes it can be confusing to have all those different feelings at once. So some advice that I've gotten in the past, curious what you think, is, don't fight your feelings. It's okay to have more than one feeling at the same time. And that's a really natural process in grief, is to have these multiple feelings that are kind of shifting. I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Oh, that's so important, especially now because of social media. I was in high school before social media and even the internet and even cell phones. And so we often went through our breakups, at a girlfriend's house on her bed, painting our toenails and crying. And that was how I dealt with it. And it was not public. So one of the first things I would recommend if you're not so much maybe in the early stages, but when you're going through a breakup, try not to go public with it for at least for a while. At least try to, definitely, I'm not saying don't share your feelings with someone you trust. Make use of the social support you have around you, but just be careful about going onto Instagram or any other social media and starting to either, maybe bash your ex in some way or stalk them. That's probably even more common after a breakup. It's just, you know, it's almost like self torment, but you know what that is? It's a natural response to losing something that you've become really super attached to. And so, by the same token, I would say don't beat yourself up if you do a late night post or something. Then just move on from that, but just try to keep in mind that this is a tender time where your brain is actually changing and you're recovering from a loss. And the best thing that you can do for yourself is really be kind to yourself. Focus, be a little selfish, take care of yourself, do something that feels good, because one way that you can let go of one thing that felt good that you don't have access to anymore is to turn to the other things that do make you feel good, but hopefully things that don't harm you. So if it feels good to you to go out to a game or something with friends, just whatever it is that that you think will provide a moment of respite from whatever this craving and this drive to do something. And it's perfectly natural. That's another thing I just would like for you to keep in mind. uh, Anytime a person's going through a breakup, is all this pain and this drama that you're going through is natural. This is how you're built, because we are hardwired for procreation and attachment and all of those things that keep everything going. So just be careful who you share with and what you're sharing in the early stages of this process until you feel like you have a more clear-eyed vision of how you feel about everything. And let those feelings roll. This is the time now to have a good cry if you want to have a good cry, and to give yourself a break.
Definitely, to be able to experience those emotions and rather than kind of avoid or repress them. And what I'm hearing is, creating boundaries, sharing with people, talking, having that community with your friends, your family, whoever it is in your support system. That's really important, but not feeling pressured to make a statement or change your status, whatever it is on social media, and just feeling like, well, I can do that when I'm ready, but I can also have some boundaries in my life and I don't need to share everything publicly. You also brought up an interesting point, around some of the coping strategies and getting out there, making sure you're prioritizing self care and you're doing things that are healthy versus unhealthy. So some of the things that I've heard before around people coping with breakups is going out, kind of excessive partying, drinking, drug use, things like that. Really, maybe as an attempt to replace some of that craving and the withdrawal feelings. I'm curious if you can comment on that, some of those maybe unhealthy coping behaviors, and if you're in a place where you find yourself doing those unhealthy things, how can you replace them? What are some more healthy kind of coping mechanisms you can use?
Whenever I think about breakups, I often remember that the first Bridget Jones movie where she goes through a breakup and she spends a weekend on her couch drinking wine, and like basically everything becomes a mess. And then she goes to the gym and does this whole montage where she improves her life. And to me that looked actually pretty typical and pretty normal. And again, I think it's a balance between managing the craving or managing how this is making you feel, and giving yourself a little bit of a break. So maybe you will want a night out with your friends. Maybe you will do something that might seem not as healthy as it could be. But then if that happens, then again, the response needs to be gentle and kind. This is a time to be gentle and kind to yourself. And there's one other thing that came up while you were speaking. Uh, about when the relationship starts. It's really important when you're in that exciting mode. And I see this over and over again in my own life and others. Don't drop your friends. Maintain your social network. Add something to your social network. Do not break ties that you're going to need when and if this situation erodes. And even over time, as the relationship goes from crazy in love to a long term or mid-term type of relationship, you want to be still embedded in your friend circle and embedded in your social network. And by the same token, if things start to get rocky, you want to be careful about what you say about your partner to your social network, because if things work out, now you've shared things that are going to make it difficult for them to embrace this person. So it sounds like a lot to take on, but in the first flush, when things are great, to kind of keep those things in mind, not like you're planning to break up, but just to maintain yourself and maintain your own integrity and your own life while you're exploring your connection with another person. And so, yeah, there are unhealthy ways to cope. And I would say try to limit them, but also be gentle with yourself as you do so. And if you have done that work during the relationship of maintaining your ties and your hobbies or whatever, they'll be there for you. But if you didn't, that's okay too. And this is where I think this is what friendship means. They'll forgive you. Reach back out. Don't be afraid or ashamed. Everyone has made mistakes in love at some point. And this is a common human experience, losing love. Why, like, at least half of all songs are about this that I've ever heard in my life. So just remember, it's normal. It's appropriate for you to feel this way, and it will change, and it will grow over time, just like any other condition when you're young.
I think that's so important to hear, that it's okay to kind of give yourself a couple of days and have some of that self-compassion. If you want to stay in bed or stay on the couch, there is a time and there is a place for that. But if it starts to really become where you're getting away from your routine, you're having difficulty keeping up with school, keeping up with friends, then it might be a problem. So there is this kind of period of grief that we go through where things might change, but then getting back to your routine and back to your social supports, that's really important. I think as we're coming to the end of this talk, there's just one more thing I wanted to ask you about before we close. And you kind of touched on it, but what was, how to be kind to yourself and this self compassion. I think a lot of times when you go through a breakup, there's a lot of rumination. And rumination means worrying, right? Replaying things over and over in your head. How could I have been better? How could I have done something differently? Could I have made this work in some way? Um, and there's a lot of self-blame that happens, but really understanding, especially when you're young, that it's totally human to make mistakes, um, and that's okay. And if you made a mistake, or even if you didn't make a mistake, but you're just kind of replaying, like, what happened, could I have done something better, there's maybe a shift that should happen, kind of away from that self-blame, more to self-reflection, and what did I learn from this experience and how can I grow in the future. So I'm wondering if, as we close out, if you could just comment on using breakups as a point of personal growth.
Yeah, it is very easy to ask yourself what if and if only. And I think one thing that is an essential part of growing up and becoming more mature is realizing for yourself that everything a person, what they're responding to when they're responding to you, even if in an intimate relationship, they're still really only responding to their perception of you, not the actual essential deep down inside to your bones you. And it might not feel that way because the relationship is very intimate and close, but a lot of times, and I know this phrase gets used all the time, it's not you, it's me, right? But a lot of times it wasn't you. It just wasn't the right time for this relationship, or it wasn't the right relationship for that person or you. And so it's just so important to try to put into context, yes, you may have made mistakes and you may have really messed this relationship up, and it's not salvageable, but still that doesn't mean that you are a bad person or you failed. And when you're young, that's when so many things, you can look at them as an experiment and a learning experience. It's really hard to see it that way in the moment, but over time you'll develop that perspective, because this doesn't just happen once in a person's life, and we learn how to cope over time. But the best way to do that is with kindness to yourself, giving yourself a break, recognizing that what the person might have been responding to wasn't actually you, but what they picked up on from you or what they perceived. And that has to do with their whole life before they ever met you. So really, again, put that relationship in perspective and put yourself in perspective, or in, not so enmeshed in the other person's judgments, because they aren't necessarily true.
As always, fantastic. Brain chemicals and what actually happens when you're in that first kind of stages, exciting stages of a new relationship, how that shifts over time, and how that can almost feel like withdrawal, and how the brain chemistry kind of mirrors addiction when you're in this relationship. We talked about setting boundaries, your personal versus public life, what's posted on social media, how to really rely on friends and family for support after a breakup, how to mechanisms, and how to make sure that you do have this kind of compassion and self-kindness for yourself, maybe giving yourself some time to be sad, and that's totally okay to feel these mixed emotions, but then making sure that you're still getting back into your routine at some point. So yeah, I think we're at the end of our talk. I can't believe how much we learned in such a short period of time. As a reminder, the reason that we come up with these talks, the way we pick the topics, is actually through the Neolth app. So you can pick in the community section, in our community poll, vote on what you want to hear next month. So go to that app, go to the community poll, vote for what this talk should be in March, and we'll look forward to seeing you in about a month. So Dr. Wheeler, thank you so much for your time today.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.